Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 93rd episode of The Atlas Society Asks. My name is Jennifer Anju Grossman. My friends call me Jag. I'm the CEO of the Atlas Society. We are the leading nonprofit organization introducing young people to the ideas of Ayn Rand in fun, creative ways like graphic novels and animated videos. Today, we are joined by a longtime friend and an eminent breeze within the Liberty Movement, Bob Poole. Before I even get introducing Bob, I wanted to remind all of you who are watching us on Zoom, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, please use the comment section, type your questions in. We will get to as many of them as we can. So Bob Poole is widely recognized as the father of the privatization movement in the United States and abroad. An MIT-trained engineer, he has advised administrations both domestically and internationally on privatization reform and transportation policy. Poole co-founded the Reason Foundation back in 1978 and ran its operations for over 2 decades. His books include Cutting Back City Hall, frequently cited as a touchstone for the Thatcher administration's privatization efforts in the UK. Also a think tank for liberty, which is the story of reason, and Rethinking America's Highways, which explores the history of and possibly better future for our highway and infrastructure. Bob, welcome again. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jag. It's really a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with you. We know about your accomplishments, but tell us, where did you grow up? What were your early influences? And how did transportation and infrastructure, of all things, become your obsession and the focus of your life's work?
I had no idea any of that would happen. I grew up in a working class suburb of Miami, Florida, and my dad worked for Eastern Airlines. And that aviation was part of my growing up. This was before deregulation. Flying was very expensive, but we had company passes. Everybody, it was a perk of working for an airline, and still is, I think. And we took vacations always by air, mostly by air. And it was just great. And of course, with prices so high, there were only about 50% of the seats filled on most flights. So we always got good seats, and it was great growing up that way. Also, my hobbies, it turns out, were transportation. I had model train layout in my bedroom. I built plastic model airplanes and ships. And I loved cars, and I was always enthralled when new cars came out, and so were all my friends. I mean, it's something that we just took a big shine to, and so I guess that steered me into engineering most likely. But I thought I was going to be just an engineer doing engineering. I never thought that public policy would be what I'd end up doing. But my interest in ideas and political philosophy blossomed at MIT, basically, starting with a course, a required course called Modern Western Ideas and Values, 2 semesters worth, and reading about the Enlightenment in particular. Really, it prepared my way for reading Ayn Rand. The ideas of rationality and of discarding doctrines and the mental strangleholds that had been held on people before the Enlightenment. Really was just a breakthrough to see. And I was involved politically in the student Goldwater movement in 1964. We had the largest campus Goldwater group in New England at MIT. And I was the director of literature, and the founder was Dave Nolan, who later went on, a classmate, later went on to found the Libertarian Party and became a lifelong friend. So, and practically everybody in that group, although it was nominally conservative, were budding libertarians, and almost all of them had read Atlas Shrugged. And when they found out that I had, they said, you got to be kidding. You've got to read this. And so in the summer of 64, while working at a summer job with the telephone company in Miami, I carried around the paperback book. I read it at lunchtime, or read it when I got home, and read it that whole summer. And wow, it really inspired me to dream about somehow working with ideas and making this a freer country. I had no thought of how I would ever do such a thing. And I got a job. My first job out of school was working at Sikorsky Aircraft. So there was aviation again. But it worked out. It's amazing how things do sometimes.
Well, given your engineering background, aviation, model trains, I mean, all of that must have really made Atlas Shrugged a total, I mean, even more of a revelation for you, because, I mean, it wasn't just that here was a novel that was lionizing entrepreneurs and,
right.
but it was, I mean, who wrote novels about trains and planes
Also,
factories?
it made me something of a feminist because of seeing Dagny Taggart running the railroad, even though she didn't have the title, was very eye-opening for me. And after I read Betty Friedan's Feminine Mystique the next summer on my summer vacation, and it really and Modesty Blaze thrillers.
Of course. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I
Those
love
are classics, very underrated. I would love to see, because they're also within the aesthetic of romantic realism, just this heroic character doing crazy things, kind of like Charlie's Angels, which is why Ayn Rand also found that as one of her favorite her television series. But getting back to another book, which is the subject of this interview, Rethinking America's Highways, a 21st Century Vision for Better Infrastructure. You make the argument that, quote, our 20th century model overly politicizes highway investment decisions, shortchanging maintenance, and often investing in projects whose costs exceed their benefits. So you have quite a historical sweep in the book. So maybe just kind of contextualize us a little bit. Where and when did we go wrong with our approach to infrastructure? Roads are always the thing where people said without government or limited government, but my roads, like what would we do without the roads? So,
so I found it ironic to be somebody who's basically calling for privatization of at least of the highways. But no, the first highways in America were private turnpikes, and that's documented in the book. There were thousands of them, mostly in the Northeast and on into the Midwest, although there was a later era in California and Nevada also. But those kind of went out of business when the railroads came along. Railroads got to places faster because those turnpikes were for horse-drawn vehicles. And so railroads really spelled pretty much the demise of those early turnpikes. When we started having automobiles and paved roads, it would have been nice to have toll roads, but states invented per gallon gas taxes as a user fee, and the money in every state was dedicated solely to building and maintaining highways. And that was not too bad of a model. Today we have electronic toll collection, so it's cheap and easy to do, but they didn't have that then. But the turning point came with the interstate system, because Congress was not really involved, other than a little bit of subsidy for post roads, which is in the Constitution. When the inspiration for the interstate highways was the Pennsylvania Turnpike. Limited access, no stoplights, no places, you had to get on at certain places and so forth. A much safer, divided highway. And by the time Congress got around to legislating in 1955 which failed in 1956, which succeeded, there were a dozen or more financed toll roads that became grandfathered into the interstate highway. The Ohio Turnpike, the Indiana Toll Road, Boston, the Massachusetts Turnpike, New York Thruway, all those were already in existence by the time the interstate program was authorized. But and Eisenhower wanted it to be a toll road system like those. But when people crunched the numbers, the South didn't have enough. South was way lower population and low economy, and much of the West would not have had enough business in the early years to pay enough tolls to finance the tolls. So they ended up coming up with, all right, we'll adopt the fuel tax model that the states have and create a dedicated highway trust fund that money would only be spent to build and maintain the interstates. Well, that worked for a while. But as the interstates got built and cost more, they had to raise the gas tax rate several times. And the money rolled in faster than it was being spent. So Congress started, well, what else can we do with this money? There was no chance they were going to stop collecting it when the interstates were finished. So every 4 years or so, they added new things that the money could be spent on. Today, over 25% of the highway trust fund goes to non-highway things, mass transit in the biggest part, but also sidewalks, bike paths, things that are inherently local. So the federal program, and in the last 12 years or so, Congress has decided we can't raise the federal gas tax any higher. It stayed at 18 cents a gallon since it's over 20 years now. And so instead, they want to keep on spending more each year. So they use general fund money, which means it's not user pays, to pump up the highway trust fund so they can spend as much as they want to do. So that system really has turned out to be a very bad system. And it's gotten even worse. It's bad at the state level too, because most states divert some fraction, anywhere from maybe 5% to, in some states, more than 50% of the gas taxes to mostly other transportation things. Although in Texas, a big chunk of it goes for public schools, believe it or not. So you have all these bizarre things. And then the legislatures, which have to make every year a decision on how to spend highway money, the money they get from the feds and the money they collect. Every legislator wants a project in his or her district that they can say, look, what I brought you, it cut a ribbon. Maintenance is not sexy. There's no ribbon cutting operated. So maintenance tends to get underfunded, which is why in many states we have hundreds or even a few thousand bridges that are in bad condition, and they're not spending enough. Many states get further behind every year on the backlog of deferred maintenance on bridges and on major highways too. But it varies greatly by state. Some are much more responsible, but the ongoing temptations for legislators to skimp on maintenance and do ribbon cutting opportunities. So that is a broken system.
Interesting. So, as you mentioned, we're currently financing highways with per gallon gas taxes. Yeah. What happens when cars continue to increase in their fuel efficiency, yeah, or use other forms of energy altogether?
Well, what's happened? I was on a committee of the Transportation Research Board in about 2006 that was convened to look at this problem. Even though electric cars were just a gleam in people's eyes at that point, and we concluded for the long term this is probably not going to be viable to continue to rely on this, and that in the short term we ought to be encouraging more toll roads and more toll lanes, but longer term we'll have to come up with a replacement. And then Congress appointed a national commission that my colleague Adrian Moore at Recent Foundation served on, that looked at 15 or 16 different kinds of user fee mechanisms, concluded that a per mile charge would be the best and fairest way to do. And so Recent Foundation was a founding member of an organization called the Mileage-Based User Fee Alliance. That's now, I think, 10 or 12 years old. And it has fostered research, and Congress has provided some grant money for state DOTs to do pilot projects, testing out per mile charges. And we've learned a whole lot from those things. People have a lot of fears that this is going to be some kind of gizmo in the car that tracks every place you go and violates your privacy, and that's a bad thing to have in government's hands. I agree that's something we should not do, but we're learning ways to do it and protect privacy in some of these state level projects. And so I've done a lot of work. Reason is doing a series of state specific studies on how to transition from gas taxes to per mile charges in ways that will try to lead to the vision in my book of highways becoming more like a utility. You know, we have investor-owned electric utilities and water utilities. We have municipal and state-run electric and water utilities. I'd rather have the investor-owned ones, but both of them are much better than the way we run highways. You pay user fees to your water supplier or your electric supplier or your telephone supplier based on exactly what you've used, not more. And the money all goes to build and maintain those systems. Far different from how we do highways. So if we have an opportunity, a once in a century opportunity with the need to transition away from the gas tax, to do it in a way that fosters highway utilities. And that's one of the things we're looking hard on trying to get across. And I'm giving talks at conferences on this, and hope we're making headway.
So, interesting that Biden chose infrastructure and roads as really kind of the signature priority for his first, hopefully last, but for his to begin his administration with. Yeah. Do you see some of those same kinds of limitations in terms of a politicized approach, or is it just pretty much the usual?
Well, the bill that passed is very much a mixed bag. It refunded the ongoing highway and federal highway transit program with the increase in money that's all being paid for by putting it on the federal credit card, meaning increases the national debt. And it has big new, what are called discretionary programs. Most highway spending traditionally goes out by formulas that are devised by Congress. The states collect the federal gas tax, send it to Washington, and then Congress divvies it up by formula based on population and roads and so forth. Well, this bill, the bipartisan bill that was passed, has expanded formula programs, but also has a huge increase in the discretionary programs that the US DOT itself gets to decide what the money is for, set the criteria. And it turns out the US DOT under the Biden administration is not very pro-highways. They actually sent out a memo to all state DOTs saying, yeah, we know the formula programs allow you to add lanes to highways and to build more new highways, but we want you to spend the money on fixing the existing highways and adding bike paths and sidewalks and things like that and transit, and not expanding highway capacity. And this created a huge furor. I wrote about it in my newsletter. I did an interview with Bond Buyer magazine about it. And it created a firestorm with Republican governors writing to Congress and the DOT, with many members of the Senate, bipartisan Senate members who crafted the bill saying, wait, DOT is way out of line, trying to tell states, and basically hinting that if they go ahead and do what they want to do and adding to highway capacity, they're going to have to face all kinds of this environmental rigmarole and so forth. But if they spend it the way we want, those projects will get an easier pass. So this is not very good.
Why do you think they took that approach? Is it just because they're ambivalent?
There's an ideological commitment on various transit and environmental groups that highways are inherently bad because cars pollute and they put out CO2 in addition to traditional pollutants, and therefore we need to stop building highways. I mean, it's okay if we maintain the ones we've got, but there should not be any more capacity. And there's even a provision in the bill that was watered down by the Senate, but that provides grant money for those cities that wish to look at tearing down interstates that were built through cities that disrupted neighborhoods. Well, that was 50 years ago. Those same people aren't there, but there's money set aside to do that. So in a way, very big aspects of the infrastructure bill were anti-highway, believe it or not. And you wouldn't know that from the media, talking about this. And so many stories that this is basically a highway and bridges bill. Well, highway and bridges are about 10% of the total of the total new money.
10%.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, lots of other stuff is infrastructure too. I mean, there's money for broadband infrastructure in rural areas, which is probably not very cost effective. There's money for lead pipe removal in water systems. These are not bad things, but they're not what people traditionally think of in an infrastructure bill. In people's minds is a highway and bridges bill, and it's very much not that. So.
Well, now I know we've got a lot of Bob Poole fans that are here watching us and that are on our chat thread there. So I want to encourage all of you to take advantage of this. Type in a question, say hi to Bob, but you can ask about Ayn Rand, Heinlein. We're going to get to that a little bit later, about our infrastructure, about reason and the incredible story and example there. But another issue, though, that I wanted to ask you about is one that's also bedeviled the Biden administration. That's supply chain interruptions. Are any of these challenges aggravated by problems with our approach to infrastructure, or is it something entirely different?
Well, I mean, this is it's a multi-part. There's no one thing that the administration or anybody else could do to solve it. And you have, partly because of all the stimulus bills, people they couldn't go to restaurants, they couldn't go to movies, they couldn't go to sports events. So they bought things for their houses. They bought new refrigerators, they bought home fixer-up things. And so this increase in demand for products and either raw materials or the actual products came from Asia, most of it. So you have this huge increase in the demand for things being shipped in containers to the United States. Ports are overloaded, can't handle this. Partly the dock workers are homesick with COVID, but it's partly just there's no way, there's not enough space to store the containers until they can be hauled. The railroads got overwhelmed. Containers stack up in rail yards and places where they shouldn't be. They don't get shipped back. So there's all these moving parts that make this just an enormous problem. And it's going to have to be worked out step by step. And the few things that the Biden administration has tried to do haven't made any real difference. I mean, they told the ports of LA and Long Beach, well, you need to go to 24-hour ships. Well, the truckers who have to take the containers have nowhere that's open to take the containers to in the night. I mean, it's true that the ports in Asia are mostly 24/7. The big ports in Europe are mostly 24/7, but they have been institutions that have adapted to that over many, many, many years, probably decades. We don't have that here. I don't think we have any 24/7 ports. So you can't just wave your hand and say, keep it open 24 hours and because there's no place for the drivers to take the containers to that's open at midnight. So that's something that maybe we'll get to that in a few years, but it's not going to solve the immediate problem. And fortunately, the backlog of ships that are anchored, it was 115 about a month ago off the ports of LA and Long Beach, is now down into the 70s. They don't have room in the harbor. They're way out, 50 or 70 miles out, trying to.
I've been seeing it. I've lived here in Malibu for 20 years, never ever see any ship, really anything out, at least this far up. But it's been a little picturesque to have all of these container ships, something different, but definitely.
But one good thing did come out of this. The Port of Long Beach had some kind of rule that container stacks could only be two containers high because it blocked people's views. I don't know of any port. You could drive past the port of Oakland, you see these mountains of containers. The port of LA is who? This was a completely artificial, ridiculous thing that did get changed because they had to have space for the containers at Long Beach. Weird.
So you have been probably evaluating, following various governors on transportation, of course, various administrations, various transportation secretaries. So looking back, maybe you could tell us who has historically done the best, what administration made the most progress on transportation and infrastructure, best Secretary of Transportation, and how would you grade Secretary Buttigieg?
Okay, well, at the federal level, the best Secretary of Transportation we ever had was Mary Peters, the second term of the George W. Bush administration. She put together a team of brilliant people, all of whom I got to know, and I'm still friends with all of them. They did very innovative things. There was one time when Congress didn't earmark money for some year, and there was money that became available to DOT, and so Mary Peters and her team figured out a grant program to incentivize cities to put in variably priced, market priced congestion relief lanes, and it's something that I had worked on for years. This is the first time there was a concerted effort at the federal government to really get them to do it, and I played a little part in being an informal advisor on some of that, and I actually then got to work with Florida DOT to help them write their proposal, which won one of those grants and implemented the first express toll lanes in Florida, in Miami on I-95, which was very good. Every time we drive to Miami, Lou, my wife, calls them the Bob lanes. So,
although I have to say, I was just in Miami 2 weeks ago, and traffic was so bad.
It's pretty bad.
It looks like they're doing some construction, but
well, there's a major interchange being reconstructed, I-95 and the Dolphin Toll Road and a major arterial all come together, and that interchange called Golden Glades has just grown like Topsy. It was never designed to be what it is. It has more than twice the amount of traffic that it was ever capable of doing without huge backlogs. And even the priced lanes are not allowed to charge a full market clearing price. So they get backed up in the afternoon rush hour too, because of that congestion at that bottleneck interchange. But that one is not being redesigned. The one that further down, closer to downtown Miami, is being rebuilt. It's about an $800 million project, and it's taking about 4 years, but it'll be much, much better when that's done.
yeah, well, I mean, it's also kind of the price of success with so many people moving
exactly.
to
Florida is a huge success story as a state. Its DOT has been very, very good. It has a master plan to have express toll lanes in all 4 major areas. There's always pushback on you can't always get all the projects in that you want to, but they're working hard. The Miami area, Tampa, Orlando, and Jacksonville all have express lane projects in place, and others in the planning stages. So Florida DOT has been a very good. Texas DOT, until the legislature cracked down on tolling, populist Republicans in Texas have controlled the legislature and the governor's office for the last decade, and stopped what was over $10 billion of private investment in express toll lanes, mostly in Dallas and Houston areas, and it's all been on hold since the legislature changed to be a populist Republican that's anti-toll and very distressing.
Well, maybe we can give some your unvarnished take on this question from Manny Vega on Facebook, asking about Texas. Texas toll roads keep rising in price, even though local transportation authorities promise that the price should have gone down by now. Have you studied whether this is mismanagement or otherwise?
Well, most of the toll roads in Texas are express toll lanes that were privately financed, although some were state financed. And the rates there have to go up. The purpose of them is to be essentially a market clearing price. The price that will guarantee that you can go at least 45 miles per hour during rush hour. And if $1 a mile toll doesn't do it, maybe $1.20 will do it. It's trial and error, and those tolls are reset in real time. And most of those things, they're reset every 5 minutes based on the actual traffic flow. And so that I can't quarrel with. I can't quarrel with that policy. Now there are some toll roads run by state agencies that have to keep up. They're building more toll roads because of Texas is growing so by leaps and bounds.
Similar to,
and
yeah.
it's expensive. But today, to build a lane mile of interstate quality road costs 3 times as much in real terms as it cost in the 1960s when the interstates were first being built. Now that's partly because of environmental regulations, it's partly because of litigation that's permitted by the Clean Air Act and the National Environmental Policy Act. But those are, and the cost of materials, concrete, asphalt, steel, all those things have gone up a lot too in the decade since then. So if you're going to have a state and able to keep growing by expanding a highway system in pace with its population, you have to pay what it costs today. And then if it's financed by tolls, that means the toll rates, even the, those toll rates, those, let's say in Dallas, Fort Worth, it's the, what is it called? It's called originally the Dallas North Tollway. It's a toll organization that has a system. And so the tolls from each of the roads go to pay the costs of the entire system. And so as they're adding new legs, the initial traffic on leg B may not quite cover it in the first 5 years. So it's financed by the revenues from all of the system. And so that's why the rates have to go up across the board to pay for the growth of the overall system that's needed for the whole metro area. And
as someone we know says, 10 Staffel, there ain't no free lunch.
Exactly.
So,
and this is what they cost. Now, if we could somehow reform NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, so that every citizen group under the sun could have a cause to file suit against a new highway project and delay things out for 10 or 12 years, and the price goes up all that time of labor, materials, and so forth. If we reformed that, and you don't have that kind of citizen litigation obstacle endlessly, you don't have it in France, you don't have it in Italy, you do have it in Germany, and to some extent in the UK. But if we were to reform, which I don't see any near-term hope of doing, but that would make some difference in holding down the cost increases of highways. But there we go.
All right, we got another question here from Anna Flanagan on Facebook. I'm going to ask you the question, let you answer it while I get a little backup power for the studio here.
Oh.
Anna,
Okay.
Anna asks, what do you make about the failure of protecting railroads in places like LA and San Francisco from being looted?
That is a horrible situation. It's a failure of I think it's politically correct lefty district attorneys who do not file charges against looting and this kind of thing. I mean, the epidemic of looting stores, shoplifting in San Francisco and the whole San Francisco Bay Area is just unbelievable. It's worse in San Francisco. They have a DA there and a legal change that shoplifting, I think up to $999 is now a misdemeanor, and they will not prosecute misdemeanors of that sort. So it's an invitation to shoplifting gangs. And the gangs that you see, you've all seen, I'm sure, the photos of the rail corridors leading from the ports of Alameda Corridor, rail corridor. That's a lifeline for the ports of LA and Long Beach to get cargo containers. Those are being looted all the time through a failure of law enforcement and a failure of prosecution. And we don't see that happening hardly any place except California. But it's epidemic.
All right. Well, I noticed you didn't give a grade to Buttigieg.
Well, all right, I don't want to be too harsh because he's only
He's
been there for less than a year.
new, and half of that time he
Unfortunately,
was on
he
maternity leave. So
does not have a transportation background. Mary Peters, for example, I think she ran the DOT in Arizona, where she's from. Then she ran the Federal Highway Administration, and then she was appointed to be Secretary of Transportation. So she was eminently qualified, knew transportation at all levels, in every mode. Pete was a mayor of a small city and was apparently a competent mayor, but city streets and sidewalks have nothing to do with what the federal role is supposed to be in transportation. And so he comes, I think, with a background that doesn't really fit the position, unfortunately. And it seemed, I think, was seen as a politically attractive appointment for a Democratic administration that is trying to curry favor with its progressive wing. And as the first gay cabinet member, wow, what a big thing to do. Just like appointing the first Black female Supreme Court justice. Well, I mean, it's fine if you get somebody who's really qualified, but I think the qualifications for the DOT secretary in this case were pretty meager. So we can give him the benefit of the doubt and see how it all turns out. A lot depends on the staff that are supporting. And actually, the acting administrator of Federal Highway Administration, responsible for that memo to the state DOTs, unfortunately, came from Massachusetts DOT. So at least does have a state DOT background. So she may turn out to be a more qualified person than the man running the whole US DOT.
All right, we're going to start getting more into some questions about reason and the liberty movement and your perspective on that. But as a transitional one, kind of spans both of the subjects, is Elon Musk. He's a controversial figure in some libertarian circles for accepting government subsidies, but I have been of the opinion that he seems much more like a Hank Rearden for his innovations with electric vehicles, tunnel technology, space travel. So I don't know if you have where you stand on.
Jay, that's my view entirely. I mean, he's a big hero. I've read several books about him. I've watched just about, the Falcon 9 launches and recovers are so routine now that I don't watch those anymore. But when the first Starship launch, I'm going to be watching that just eagerly and probably in tears at what a triumph that thing is. I mean, he with Jeff Bezos coming up as in good second place, invented reusable launch vehicles, which is the first step toward real commercialization of space for goods and people and space exploration, making it affordable by comparison to the massive costs of NASA development with traditional aerospace contractors. I mean, innovation. It's just spectacular. Tesla too. I mean, I don't own a Tesla, and I don't like the big touch screen, and I don't trust the automation, which I think was developed with some flaws. But it's still an extremely innovative vehicle, and it's paving the way. It's a model for the entire electric vehicle industry that is learning from what Tesla has done. So taking advantage of the fact that the government is willing to subsidize people to buy electric vehicles, and that he can get credits from companies that are starting out making vehicles that don't sell, he can get credits and they make some of their money on that. But he didn't ask for those programs, he didn't invent them. He's an entrepreneur running a company. If the law provides that, he's not a libertarian, so I can't say. I hope I wouldn't take them if I were as big of an innovator, an entrepreneur as he. But I can't really fault him for doing that. Not given what he's given the world in these incredible breakthroughs.
Yeah, agreed. I don't quite understand the vitriol that comes.
And there are so few real heroes out there.
Right.
It's so wonderful to have a few like Bezos and Musk.
So speaking of Musk and this technology, how far do you think we are away from self-driving trucks? And what do you anticipate would be the
I have written,
follow-up?
I believe that trucks are going to be the first viable application of vehicle automation, partly because it's the model that's likely to occur is the automation will be for the long haul on limited access interstate highways and comparable roads. The local traversing and getting off a highway will probably be done for a long time by a human driver getting to a distribution center to deliver the goods. But the highway part is relatively easy by comparison. It's an operational domain that doesn't have children running out and dogs chasing balls and all the construction debris and so forth. It's a very benign environment for an automated truck. And the potential of this is enormous in terms of improving the productivity. Railroads operate, they're slower than trucks, but they operate 24 hours a day. Truck drivers have federal rules. They have to stop and get 8 hours of rest. So trucks do not operate 24/7. If trucks can operate 24/7 on the long haul, they'd be much more competitive with railroads, and the relative cost of goods will go down. People always say, oh, well, but this is going to put all kinds of drivers out of work. Well, there happens to be an chronic massive shortage, particularly of long haul over the road truck drivers. The turnover rate in some years at some major companies is 70, 80% annually. This is very hard jobs for people being away from home. If you change to a model where the human drivers are mostly doing local runs and the automation is doing the long haul, you'll have a much better chance of having satisfied employees. You can be home every night with their families instead of on the road most of their lives. This, I think, is going to be a benefit to everybody in trucking as this comes out. And I think we have vehicles now operating in Texas, like between Houston and Austin and in Arizona on reasonably long distance routes. They're still operating with a safety driver on board, but they're doing it autonomously in those benign environments. So it's a question of getting the legalization, demonstrating the case that it's safe enough to be allowed without the safety driver on board. Now, one of the things that may make that more viable is to have real-time supervision from an office where drivers, virtual drivers who are able to take over control if something goes wrong and safely park the truck. Maybe the automation can do that, but it may not be able to do it in every circumstance. So the ability to have a remote driver able to step in when needed, maybe that's the kind of thing that's needed in the early years of this. But I think we're probably 5 years away from some of this being real with no drivers on board, and 10 years away from it being large and a major part of the industry. It's much further away than personal vehicles that can operate under any kind of, and you notice they're starting in Texas and Arizona where there's no snow. Snow is hard for the AI to deal with, and for the sensors to see through and so forth. The road markings aren't clear often. Right. So cars, to be a ubiquitous personal vehicle, have to basically operate in almost any environment, any operational design domain. And that is a much, much harder problem to solve. So a lot of predictions 5 years ago about how soon all this was going to be happening were just completely fanciful. The people in AI didn't realize how difficult this was going to be and how expensive the sensors were going to be. And there's still a lot of fights going on over whether camera type things can do all that's needed, or you need LiDAR and this and that, the other thing, and none of that is settled. So it's going to be a long years away. And there's a question of what kind of insurance is there going to be for fully autonomous personal vehicles? Are they going to be owned by individuals? Are they going to be leased by fleets to individuals or to operators like Uber and Lyft and so forth, where the fleet can take the legal responsibility if something goes wrong with the automation? It's very clear cut, and you don't have a legal question of is it the vehicle owner, individual driver who maybe somehow was at fault, and you could get hugely complicated legal things out of that. And I don't think the insurance industry is set to handle that in that fashion.
Well, we've got a lot more questions here about Musk, about trucks, about tolls, but I did want to also jump over to our other topic. And this is, tell us about the origins of this book. It's a little bit of a memoir as well.
It is, yeah. Well, actually, a senior official that I knew from the Mary Peters DOT asked me, I was suggesting he should write a book about his experience there. And he said, well, when are you going to write your book? Oh, maybe I should write a book. But it still didn't kick until my MIT reunion, when I was asked to give a talk to my class mates at that reunion, the 50th reunion, believe it or not, about my unusual career. They had picked out 5 people who had non-traditional engineering careers. And so I had to create this elaborate presentation. And I thought of all the things that I had done as an entrepreneur starting Reason Foundation, probably different than most starters of public policy think tanks, and put together this 50 or 60 slide presentation. And then I thought, gee, maybe that could make the basis for a book. And so I decided to do that. And when Reason Magazine's 50th anniversary was coming, was a few years away from that point. And I suggested to David, what if I wrote a book? And he said, my God, do it and do it in time for the 50th. How am I going to do it in that time? I was finishing up the highways book.
Wow.
And so I had the final stages of one book and the start of the other, and I somehow got them both done and published. And so that was really the origin. And so I decided to try the story of how did I get to this, because that's only the first chapter to this position of discovering the fledgling Reason magazine that Lanny Friedlander started in 1968 as a student at Boston University. And I discovered through a little classified ad and subscribed in its first year. It was mimeographed. He was obviously an objectivist, or certainly influenced by the name of the magazine, the things he wrote about and what he said. He persuaded me to write an article for an issue of the second year, and didn't tell me that he was switching to offset printing, typesetting and offset printing. And the first issue that had that was the issue with my article calling for airline deregulation, which he titled "Fly the Frenzied Skies," after a United Airlines slogan. And I saw that. I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. I did this, so I decided I would continue writing. And then the Freeman from Foundation for Economic Education reprinted the article. Reason at those days had 400 subscribers. The Freeman had about 40,000. And from the Freeman, I started getting letters from professors, from people in government about that article. And this could be powerful if it's done at a larger scale. And so when Lanny Friedlander started running out of money and calling me and calling my new friend Tibor McCann living in Santa Barbara by that time, and Tibor was getting his PhD in philosophy, objectivist philosopher, we became friends and decided we would try to take Reason off Lanny's hands, because he was out of money and had a subscription liability. And so we came up with this plan, and rounded up our wives and Manny Klossner, a lawyer in Los Angeles who Tibor had met and was a bona fide libertarian with background at the University of Chicago. He was part of the staff of a journal, a libertarian journal that was there. So we created Reason Enterprises to do the magazine as a hobby business. And we somehow had enough naive good luck that we built the circulation to 10,000 in 7 years. Thanks in part to Nathaniel Brandon helping by letting us use his mailing list after we persuaded him that we were not anarchists and we were responsible people.
Right.
And he gave us an interview, the first interview that he had given anyone after his split break several years ago with Ayn Rand. So that created a big buzz, and we got lots of new subscribers from that. But by the time 1977 came around, Cato Institute was being started, and they were going to do 2 magazines with big funding from the Koch brothers. And we decided, I said, look, we cannot go on as a hobby biz. We either have to figure out a way to raise money and put this on a professional full-time basis, and I need to get paid if I was going to run it, which I de facto was anyway. And so that led to creation of Reason Foundation. And we found an angel investor and opened an office in Santa Barbara, and somehow it worked. We made some big mistakes, and but the biggest success thing was moving to LA in 1986, after starting in 78 in Santa Barbara, because that put us on the map. And LA Times all of a sudden took us seriously, wrote an article about our moving to LA. We did monthly lunch events in downtown LA, and reporters came and business people came. We did annual banquets. All of a sudden, we were a real thing then, and it made a difference. So I tell all that story in the book, and then I confess that as an entrepreneur, I ran it at very close to the line, focusing on growth, and did not build any reserves, and so we were in very bad shape in years where there was a recession. And my successor, David Knott, who we were very fortunate to recruit, was focused full-time on growing Reason Foundation and growing the financial base, and has done an incredible job of building the organization. We have, I think, close to a year's budget in the bank, earning interest and invested in stocks and so forth, and a little bit of Bitcoin, and major grant programs that are multi-year and so forth. So it's thanks to David's skill in growth and fundraising that we bought a building in LA and paid off the mortgage in 3 years, opened an office and a full-time office in DC, and raised our presence in DC, and started Reason TV, which was suggested to us by Drew Carey, who had been a Reason reader and fan for years, and thought we should have a presence in the visual media, and helped us find producers and educated us on what it takes to produce video, and starred in the first 20 documentaries that it produced. So it's been a great show after that. I was the startup entrepreneur, and David was the builder, and Reason is in very solid shape today. I think we have something like 80 staff. I can't really keep. I'm on the board still, but I can't keep track of the staff. I don't know half of the staff personally, and the budget is I think is 15 or 16 million. And it was 5 when I stepped down and David replaced me. So, and the reserves, it's just fabulous.
Well, I can tell you, for someone who is running a much smaller liberty organization, this is kind of a good blueprint. I would highly recommend it to anyone out there, particularly in the liberty space, in the nonprofit management space, even more generally, because of the tremendous growth. It's not just of the magazine and its subscription, how you guys have kept pace with these disruptions in communication technology. And then, of course, also, the really unique work that you do. I mean, we were talking before, it's like, is there anybody else doing like transportation?
Right. Well, it's not like it's transportation, it's school choice, it's public pension reform,
the pension reform,
it's criminal justice reform. I mean, all these programs, and all of them David Knott calls it, using the DNA that I created, of being pragmatic libertarians. Not, if you're trying to change policy, you don't start by trying to make everybody libertarian. You focus on why the status quo is doing poorly, how a privatized type or market type solution is better in its own terms. It certainly advances our worldview, definitely, and builds the case for a more freer society. But you don't sell it on people have to be libertarians in order to buy the policy. And that pragmatic libertarian approach has been a key, I think, to the success of all of our programs, and be willing to work with. We don't take any government money, never have and never will, but we call the motivated people in the public sector that want our advice, we call them our customers. And we're happy to have them as customers. Mayor Steve Goldsmith, who privatized 50 public services in Indianapolis when he was mayor, and got written up, got national awards. One of my star pupils. Mitch Daniels, who's now the head of Purdue University, was helped on Mitch Daniels on Steve Goldsmith's mayoral program. He became the director of OMB under George W. Bush, and then he became governor of Indiana and privatized the Indiana toll road with help from me. And so, I mean, we've got customers like that we are very proud to have. And it's not the traditional libertarian thing to do.
Literally where the rubber meets the road. Okay, I've got 3 more minutes. I absolutely am not going to let you go without asking you about Heinlein, and the how you discovered that he was a Reason fan, and how that led to a private.
First, I grew up reading Heinlein science fiction. He was the one who laid the basis for my becoming a libertarian. Individualism, questioning authority, strong creator type, being able to accomplish things. Then in the early days of Reason Enterprises, run out of my house. So the postal service requires a street address. So the street address was there. I got a Christmas card from Ginny Heinlein one year saying how much they enjoyed the magazine and Robert saved them. So I started a regular postal mail correspondence with her, hoping to get an interview with Heinlein for the magazine. Well, that turned out to be they had a policy that some interviews had gone bad. But she said, but we'd happy to have you visit. So needless to say, it was not that far from Santa Barbara to Santa Cruz. So we planned a vacation trip to go there, and were invited to spend the afternoon with the swimming pool, got a tour of the house that Robert designed. And we were pleasant enough that we were invited to stay for dinner, and had a lovely dinner talking about all kinds of things. And before we left, he asked if I had any of his books. And of course I had a box of first editions that I had bought that I hoped he would autograph. I brought them inside. He autographed all treasures that I will never part with. But it was a great experience. And he really did love Reason magazine and save the issues. And that it's one of the many psychic rewards that I got for all the years of hard work and close to the line things and things that failed and so forth, was getting to meet heroes like that. Margaret Thatcher, to be on the stage with Lady Thatcher after she was no longer prime minister and ask her questions from the audience, and to talk with her, have her autograph my copy of Downing Street Years in the reception before that banquet. I mean, these things are values that there's no money value you could attach to those. It's rewards for hard work and having good ideas, I guess.
And the tremendous love and esteem that so many of us feel for you, for Reason, and for the continued wonderful work that you're doing. I want to recommend everyone go out and get a copy of The Think Tank for Liberty on Amazon, and also Rethinking America's Highways. I have not only read this, but I have reviewed it on Amazon. So you can go and check that out. Make sure to sign up for, go to the Reason website, sign up for their email updates, follow them on social media, and perhaps I'll even see some of you at the next Reason Retreat, which is coming up in Nashville.
In Nashville. Good.
Look forward to seeing you, Bob and Lou, there. And congratulations, and thank you again for giving this time to us and for giving us this incredible example to follow.
I enjoyed this very much. Thanks.
Okay. Bye.